Hello, welcome to Roll for Crit. Today we are joined by two special guests from Thunderworks Games, Tim Virnig, the brand ambassador, as well as Keith Matejka, a founder of Thunderworks Games and a designer of the Role Player series. Super stoked to have you guys on. Thank you for joining us. Of course, right now we are in the final days of the Role Player Adventures campaign on Kickstarter. So why don't we just start off right there in case anyone doesn't know. Could you give us an overview of what that game is and how it relates to the rest of the Role Player saga?
Sure. So Role Player Adventures is started out as the answer to the question of after I'm done playing Role Player, I want to, can I do something with my character? So it is a cooperative, narrative driven game for 1 to 4 players. It has 12 adventures in the box. 11 of them are continuous campaign, and the final one is a highly replayable side quest. And you are playing as a bunch of adventurers going on this epic quest, right? So one of the big hooks is that you can play using one of the many pre-generated characters that comes in the box, or you can take any character that you've built playing Role Player with any number of expansions and import that character into Role Player Adventures and play through the campaign that way. So it's a standalone title, but it has this ability to import from another game. So that's kind of fun. And each adventure takes roughly 2 hours to play. The first are a little bit shorter, and the later ones are a little longer. But it's just it's a cool cooperative experience where you get to go on all these adventures. And the kind of the core tenet of the game is that the game is listening to you. So you're making lots of choices. You're deciding who to side with. You're making small choices. You're making big choices, and there's multiple systems in the game to remember all those things that all those choices you've made. So the game is reacting to those things. So it really makes the world feel like it's alive, and that you have a significant impact in what's happening in the world of Ulos. So that's kind of the big picture pitch on RPA.
Now, it seems like a very obvious jump for Role Player. I mean, we've made these characters. You're so excited to use them. Now you can. But obviously, it's not as simple as going from A to B. There's probably a lot of different iterations. Was there ever one where you decided, let's just make a role-playing book, like a D&D or Pathfinder book, and let the DM solve all these problems?
Yeah, I mean, so that's one of the paths, right? So we could have just made a traditional role-playing game. But that's not where my passion is. I'm a board gamer at heart, so I want to have a more driven kind of board game style experience. So that is kind of where we went. And then early on in development, we've been working on this game for quite a long time. It's a good 3 years, and there were early versions where there was kind of we're trying to figure out how much role playing we want in this game, and there was kind of these pockets of here's an environment. Somebody describe what they see kind of stuff, which is very, very kind of traditional role-playing game. But we found that it just didn't fit with this title very well. This is a more on the rails, more like a choose your own adventure kind of book or fighting fantasy where the game is explaining to you the situation that you're in, and then you're making a choice. And I would say about maybe 60% of the game is reading, making choices as a group, and then about 40% of it is rolling dice and manipulating them with your character cards to try to solve combat puzzles and skill check puzzles. So it definitely is a board game at the end of the day. But the idea of doing a traditional role-playing game, kind of, especially now that we've kind of built out this world significantly, is something that I'm thinking about for sure.
So that, often people talk about a game as either an experience or, a board game. So this is really the marriage of both of them. It is a gaming experience because you're going through the world of Ulos, and as Keith said, the choices that you're making are affecting where the story goes. But there are mechanics in it, so it's not just a gaming experience, but also there's a true game in there where you are rolling dice, manipulating those dice to succeed or fail, at skill checks or combat. And you're doing that cooperatively. So you're puzzling together your strengths with the rest of the party to try to get those dice rolls to succeed. So people who have played it have found that it is that sort of adventure experience, but it's also, there's a game in there that's immensely satisfying. So we think we found the perfect mix of both of them.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that this really seems like, in a lot of ways, almost like the culmination of all the role player stuff coming together, especially from the original base role player. So I guess you probably also don't want to make it too much of a departure. It still lives in that world a little bit. I'm curious about the system too. You're talking about where the game remembers things, and I'm wondering how complicated or difficult that was to design. Like, did you have to write just a million different branching paths, or is it more focused than that? How does that work?
So there are multiple systems. One of them is kind of a traditional where you write down keywords, and then the game asks you if you have that keyword, and then we've got narrative branching. I mean, the lead writer James Ryan will tell you the branching in this game is crazy town, right? So it's crazy the amount of branching that we have. So there's lots of narrative branches based on keywords that you might have. So the keyword system is built in to just that adventure. So the keywords are just for the adventure, and then there's a secondary system that is using title cards. So title cards, you receive these title cards. And it's important decision points, and I think there's 107 of them, and they remember the choices that you've made from adventure to adventure. So like if you meet a character in adventure 1, and then you get to adventure 7, you might run into that character, and then the book is going to ask you if you have that title card, and then the narrative is going to branch based on whether you have that or not. And then there's also a third super important system where it has the game has 3 different factions that we're tracking your standing with. There's the King's Guard, the Starlit Door, and which is like this chaos cult, and then the third one is the Dragul, which are like the vampires and the goblins and stuff. So every choice that you make is a lot of choices that you make, I should say, are going to push those trackers around. And then the game is going to ask you, like, hey, if your favor with the King's Guard is 3 or higher, then you might get this bonus that makes this skill check with other members of the King's Guard easier, or vice versa. So on top of those things, part of this project is that there's also this additional expansion that you can get called Nephros' Judgment. And Nephros' Judgment is a set of side quests based for each individual player that you're going to have like these moments throughout the campaign that are specific to you. And in those, we're tracking your character's alignment, which is changing there, and you're going to get special keywords just for your stories as well. So we're going to branch on those too. So there's no shortage of ways that the game is taking a look at what you've done, what choices you made, and it's reacting to all those things, which leads to having these storybooks that are 50 pages long, to make sure that we can accommodate like all these cool branches. And I think that when people tend to approach these types of projects, they look at the amount of work that it takes to support all this branching, and then they end up deciding eventually to kind of, hey, let's pull this in, and let's make some of these branches start condensing so that we don't have to support all these different edge cases. And in this project, we said, no, we want to support those edge cases. Right? Support those edge cases so that people can have this kind of unique, can have a different experience than somebody else. And they can have that water cooler moment when they're talking about their character that they interacted with, and they had a totally different experience because of the previous decisions that they made. And so we know when we were going in and writing all these passages, like, there's a pretty significant percentage of people that play this game that are never going to read this, right? Because they're going to pick the other path. But the people that do get to read that, then they have a cool, unique experience, and I think that's awesome. So, yeah.
And that also lends to the huge replayability of this game. So, I mean, it's obviously it's an investment. It's not a cheap game, but there is so much replayability in this game. You can play, as Keith said, through the adventures multiple times, and it will not be the same, because each time that you do, the choices that you're making are leading you down a different path. So you could play it with a couple of people in your game group, and then go home and solo it, and it would be a different game if you choose different things. Maybe in one run through, you decide that you want to be the murder hobos and just do all the bad stuff, and become a real high reputation with the Dragool faction. Or maybe the next time you play, you're going to be real lawful good, and you're going to get a lot of favor with the King's Guard. So the choices that you're making are dictating where the adventure goes, through not only that individual adventure, but in the subsequent adventures that come. So,
well, as of now, at least last I checked on Kickstarter, you're doing pretty well. At least 5 times your goal, I think. Initially, I looked at a lot of great stretch goals. Do you have any plans where you might go with this, like maybe another new book, or even somehow bringing in cartographers and lockup into this?
We're not even done with this one, and already you're trying to get us to make more content. But
we're greedy. We want more.
Right.
People keep asking for that.
I would note that like one of the adventures in the campaign takes place in the same prison that Lockup takes place in. So cool. And we knew this was happening. So there's actually quite a few little Easter eggs in Lockup that refer to Role Player Adventures. So that's kind of a fun thing. And I mean, we've been building this world, and it's all been happening in the background while we did cartographers in Lockup. So there are things in Lockup that are kind of Easter eggs to Role Player Adventures as well. So I love those kind of. I come from the video game world, and I love Easter eggs. So we like to include those as well. So, but one of the cool things that we're doing is we have these stretch goals that we're going to build out a character creator playset. So it's like a documentation so that people can use what's in the box, and we're going to give them very clear guidance, and they can use that content to build their own stories with the content that we've given them. And then hopefully, if we continue to do well, then we'll provide even like brand new content that people can use to create stuff. So I've always I loved when there was this, I always mention this, there was this old website called Heroscapers for people who played Heroscape, where people could and people on there were like making their own figures and making up their own stat cards, and people were playing against each other, and I thought that was like super awesome. So I would love to foster like a community of people around this game so that people can create adventures with the content we've provided, and do new things and like have each other play through it and all that stuff. So I mean, Role Player Adventures is doing well. Will we do more content for it? It's, it looks like that's probably going to happen.
Safe bet.
But in the meantime, I want to see the community jump in and try their hand at kind of exploring the world and putting out interesting things.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly in the spirit of traditional role-playing games too, of course. Yeah, the homebrew stuff is obviously a big part of it. And kind of on the same level of homebrew, you can homebrew your own role-player character and import them into this one, right? And was that something that you always envisioned from the start? And did you kind of design the characters in the game as working within that framework, or did that come in later that you could really integrate those two?
No, from day one, this was like, okay, we need to be able to import our characters. So like that was actually a pretty significant design restriction of like, how do we pull over all the stuff from this other game and making it meaningful in this game, but in a totally different way? So, and so that it's not like overbearing. Like, we don't want to import a bunch of stuff that people actually aren't going to use. But we want, it was definitely a challenge. So it's like we knew going in, we got to support 36 different classes, because 36 different classes exist in Role Player Adventure and Role Player. We have to support, these are the 17 races that exist in Role Player. So these are the 17 races that belong in this world, at least to start out with. And like, we're assigning them to factions now. And, there's like, there's all these little things that we had to bring over, so it definitely was a challenge. And there was a moment in which like everything was kind of brought over, and then we just like weren't really using like the backstory part or the alignment part very much. So it's like, well, if we're not using this, let's just kind of chop this off and move this over to the side. And then later on in development, this idea of like everybody having their own unique backstory kind of bubbled to the top, and we're like, well, let's bring that backstory part back over, but it'll be part of this kind of expansion that you can add to it. And then the other piece was like, well, let's connect alignment to that as well. So alignment and backstory kind of at one point were kind of severed, but then we kind of reattached it with the expansion piece later. So definitely it was an interesting challenge because we knew that there's, I don't know what the number is, but like all the market cards from all the role player games need to be able to be converted to a new card in Role Player Adventures. So that means we need all these cards, and they all need unique abilities because unique abilities are cool. And so that was like a big challenge. It's like, okay, design these 500 cards. You're like, okay, here we go.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And then we can't just like have stuff just from Role Player. We need like unique, interesting things that are specific to the story that players will be able to run into. So those turn into like a big deck of rare cards that people run into. So yeah, there's definitely, there were moments where like the fact that we had to import these characters felt more like a curse than a blessing. But it was definitely an interesting puzzle to try to solve, and I think it turned out really good. So
the fans of the Role Player universe demand it, right? They want to be able to see the characters and the classes and the items that they've come to enjoy in Role Player, in Monsters and Minions and Fiends and Familiars. They want to be able to rediscover those and see them again. So being able to make those available, and as Keith said, to now introduce some new rare items, which will be exciting. So you'll get some new stuff. And we used some of the artwork from the other games so that people, when they see an item that they remember, it'll look familiar to them. And that just makes the world that much richer. People will connect with it. But if you don't bring your character over from Role Player, that's okay. How many pre-gens are we up to now, Keith?
Last time I checked, it was 21, but it might be 26. I need to double check.
So if you don't bring over your character from Role Player, and you don't need to have Role Player or any of the Role Player games in order to play Role Player Adventures. This is a standalone. So you'll have stuff in the box you'll be able to choose from. It's not just like 5 different characters. There's a lot in there. So it'll be unique. It'll be a chance for people to now just get into the world of Role Player. And I'm pretty confident that when people try Role Player Adventures, they're going to want to go back and lock up a try and the other Role Player games to see the world from a different angle.
Yeah, I believe a lot of those pre-generated ones were in stretch goals, so maybe by the time this ends, there's going to be more than the number we have listed there. Though, personally, playing through Role Player, I know, even just though I'm collecting dice, I'm very connected to my character. That's why I've always been excited by importing it. I'm like, I really love what I made here. You somehow get connected with the story without actually yet playing with them. But I'm curious, though, you mentioned, for example, obviously the replayability of playing solo and maybe playing a more evil character versus how your group did if you're the nice people. But you also mentioned a replayable side quest book at the end. Like, is that different in just playing differently, or?
Yeah, so the side quest is called Deathmatch at the Coliseum of Ashes. It takes
good title.
You basically, spoiler alert, you basically just get kind of it's an adventure that you can play at any point after the first adventure. So once you played Adventure 1, which is kind of like half tutorial, half story, then you can jump over to the side quest at any time, and you can play obviously play it as many times as you want. So the big thing that's different about it is that the composition of a adventure in Role Player Adventures is kind of, there's a main storyline that has a map with many 4, 5, 6 locations. And then in between those locations, you'll hit these random encounters, and there's usually about four of them in any given adventure. In the side quest, there's kind of less core locations, but there's 36 different encounters to do, and that involves you roll on this table, and that's going to tell you which encounters you're going to have. So you're going to be able to have a different combination and a different sequence of encounters in every time you play this side quest. So kind of the structure of the adventure is kind of pushed over towards this one that has more variety to these encounters. So, and the thing that's interesting, and thematically, where you're basically, these are a bunch of different fights in this coliseum that you're fighting for your freedom, which is actually, if you read the fluff text for Lockup, the king in 6 weeks in that game is going to allow your crew to fight for their freedom in the Coliseum, and he's referring to the Coliseum of Ashes, which is the side quest in Roleplayer Adventures.
Awesome.
Everything ties together.
Everything, So basically, King Taron, who's the king, he's this halfling king. He had gotten transported to this place at one point, and then when he returned, he actually tried to recreate the Colosseum in Ulos as well, which you'll find out about in Adventure 4. But anyway, so that's basically how that's structured. And I mean, it's nice where if you just like, hey, we don't want to continue the campaign because somebody's not here or whatever, or somebody just wants to try the game out and see what it feels like, they can just do the side quest and it doesn't progress the main storyline. So, or if you're just looking for a break, and that's another way to do it too. And the side quest actually has some really interesting creative stuff going on in there. And I mean, and there are references, like, so even though you can play it at any time, if you've completed certain things in the main quest, that's going to change stuff in the side quest. So there's a scenario in which you might play the side quest early, and then you make a bunch of decisions in the main story, and then you decide to play the side quest again, and you might run into that one of those encounters again, but it might change because of some decisions that you made in the main storyline. So there's some cool stuff going on.
Like a game within the game. Keith had mentioned about playing the side quest when you might not have some people in your group that are there for a particular night. I wanted to mention that because this is often an issue with a campaign game, where there's some very popular campaign games out there right now where if someone in your game group isn't there that week, you end up having to play their character for them to mixed results, right? And then when they come back, if you screwed something up and they're dead, then they're mad at you, right? So we've kind of done that with Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle Earth in our game group when we were playing before in the last winter. But the nice thing about Role Player Adventures is written into the rules, there are specific instructions on how to add or remove someone from the campaign for a particular adventure, and it rebalances it, I think, very elegantly so that you can continue to play. So that person just kind of sits out that game. Maybe they're hanging out at the pub in the village while everybody goes out on the next adventure, and you can bring them back in without any problems. So it kind of prevents that problem of having to play through a quest without somebody being there.
That might be a bit of a problem because one person in our group would go to the pub anyways.
Right, or you just go to the Coliseum and have a little fight.
Yeah, God knows in our group that we've had no shortage of issues with scheduling. I mean, anyone who's played any kind of role playing game too, that's that could be an issue.
It's the true final boss.
Yeah.
So this kind of fixes that problem. I think in a really good way.
Yeah, I have one final question that's very stupid, but I'm curious about it. Your other spin-off, so to speak, role player games have both been Cartographers and Lockup have had the subtitle A Role Player Tale, and with this one, it's called Role Player First, followed by Adventures. Was that a conscious decision, or did it just roll off the tongue better that way?
I mean, I don't think it wasn't really a conscious decision, but like in my mind, like Role Player Adventures is just kind of the next step of the role player line, whereas in Lockup and Cartographers are kind of offshoots. And there's like the desire to associate these products together, right? So like if I just see Cartographers, I'm not necessarily going to know that it's in the role player universe unless somebody tells me. And so that's kind of what that Role Player Tale kind of tag does. Now, so for example, the next game, the next Cartographers game that's coming out is called Cartographer's Heroes. So like there was this moment like where, do we name this game Cartographer's Heroes, a role player tale? Like are we winning the competition for the longest game name ever? So for that specific title, because the name is already pretty long, we'll probably cut that moniker just because it's already kind of the original Cartographer's game is already associated with it. But like, I guess I think of Cartographers and Lockup as like side quests, and so that's why that little tag is on there. Role Player Adventures, I kind of feel like that's the main story. So then we don't need that on there. So, I mean, it's not something that like I have like some document that like tracks which games are going to have this role player tale on it and which ones don't. I just kind of make these decisions sometimes and just go with my gut, and that's the way it turns out,
The real truth of it is it's what would fit on the box and look good, really. That's
Fair enough. Now, I'm guessing I'm wrong, but Cartographer Heroes isn't you exploring a hero being like, oh, they have an eye here and 2 arms over there instead of a map. Or am I wrong? Is that actually you're building a person that way?
You are not building a character in Cartographer's Heroes. Yeah, we already have a character building game. So Cartographer's Heroes is still a map building game, but there's heroes out there that are that you can discover that help defeat monsters, and it's got a bunch of other cool stuff. So
that can be very helpful considering the number of times some bugbears showed up in the most awkward moment.
There's a brand new set of monsters, and they're even more annoying. So.
Yep.
Awesome. Like to hear that. Well, we've loved all the role player games. It's a great series. It's really cool the way you've built out this world. I mean, did you have these grand plans from the first role player, or did it all just kind of grow off of each other organically?
It was definitely organic. So the original design for role player was the thought process. I was coming out of video games, and like it's very common in video games where like the player's character never talks, because the designers want the players playing the game to kind of feel like they're that character. So the idea behind role player was similar. It's like, make this as generic as possible so that people can pick up this obnoxious card and this blessed mace, and they can create their own stories in their head about who that character is. But then when we got to as we go down the line, we start figuring out what we're going to do with these characters. They need a world to live in. So to have a world, suddenly we're getting very specific. So we started out really generic, and then I didn't have this grand plan. I just had this cool game idea, and people seem to like it. So. And then, I wanted to do more games, and I was getting pitched fantasy games, and I like fantasy games. And the thought process is basically like, well, I'm kind of already building this fantasy world. Why would I build another one? Why don't I just connect all these things? So the world has grown organically that way. And especially with Cartographers and Lockup, it was kind of like in the background we were working on Role Player Adventures and setting up definitions as to like who the gods are and how the different races interact and who's getting along and who's fighting. It was like, well, we've got all this stuff we're building in the background. We're just gonna kind of slide it into these other games because those games didn't take 3 years to make. So it's been an interesting process of kind of starting to build out this world, but it definitely started from like a super generic space and is moving to more and more specific with each game.
Now we have this giant document of the World of Ulos wiki, which is becoming very quickly about as rich and detailed as Middle Earth. So we're rewriting Middle Earth.
It is. I mean,
so is this you hinting at a new movie series that's coming out soon?
I just got off the phone with Peter Jackson.
Breaking news.
Now,
it became a problem when especially when there's multiple writers that were writing, and I had my own ideas, and some of those writers are more familiar with role player than others, and just like getting all those details of the world that people have been adding and like putting them in one place so that we kind of make sure we're not contradicting ourselves anywhere, or like it also became a resource. It's like, okay, this character is making tea with flowers. It's like, okay, what flowers have some of the writers already come up with, and then like we can kind of pick from that list, or we can decide to add to it. So it's actually been really interesting and fun to like see our kind of internal wiki about the role player world kind of getting fleshed out all the time.
Love that lore. Love digging into love looking at Wikipedia, all that stuff. I want
100%.
all those
So,
backstories.
I think when this interview drops, we'll have just a couple more days left in the Kickstarter campaign. And there's also an opportunity if people wanted to give it a try. It is available for free on Tabletopia and Tabletop Simulator. We just have the first adventure in there. So you can play it solo or with your group virtually, because unfortunately, as much as we wish we could be doing the convention circuit this summer and showing people the game, we don't have that opportunity with the current situation. So people have the opportunity to try it themselves before they back it. But we hope they'll give it a go and enjoy it as much as we enjoyed making it and back it.
I mean, it really does stink that we can't see this stuff in person. So it's really nice to get that chance to try out at least the first chapter, and get hooked on the story.
It's definitely it's been difficult just because I don't want to give too much away because I want people to have that sense of discovery and the surprise of the game. But it's if we don't show you anything, it's hard to get excited about it, So it's been an interesting balance between showing enough of the game to get people interested and confident in backing it on Kickstarter, but also trying to make sure we're holding back as much stuff as we can because I just want to make sure people are surprised and can have that sense of discovery when they play it.
Right. In particular, when it's a story, you don't want to, if the beat's already out, they know that story beats. You want to make sure you give as little, even though, like you said, you can branch into, I don't know how far your branching goes. So
right.
A lot of branches.
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem is the first adventure is the lightest of all the branches because it's mainly a tutorial. So that's the one that we're showing off because it starts the story and it's the simplest, but it also doesn't really showcase the branching and stuff that we're doing, later in the campaign. So I guess that's something to keep in mind. That adventure is definitely the shortest and it's definitely the least branchy, but it definitely gives you a feeling of what it's like to play it moment to moment and figuring out the mechanics for dice manipulation and stuff like that.
Yeah, just enough to want more, just like we would do at a convention if we were demoing it, just to get a taste of it. But believe me, there is a lot more. So don't worry, you will have a lot of opportunity to see a story that really, really develops in ways that are going to, trust me, blow your mind. So
I'm ready for it. I believe it. I mean, also, I feel looking at Tim, your background looks like you are in a booth at a convention. I feel.
Yeah, this is actually just a green screen.
It's very impressive.
This is the warehouse.
Well, it definitely has our endorsement if you're watching this, based on our history with all the role player games. We love the idea behind this one for sure. If you're watching this, hopefully when it comes out, just a couple of days left to check it out and back it. We're going to have a link in our description, and no reason you shouldn't give that demo version a try because it's free, so go try it. And thank you guys so much for joining us, and good luck in the final days of the campaign. Not that you really need good luck. I mean, like we said, you've way surpassed your goal, but hopefully you get enough sleep when this is over and things calm down for you.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, check it out, everybody. Role Player Adventures. This has been Roll for Crit.
If you love board game content, do us a favor, like and subscribe, and support us on Patreon.
Keep watching our content to guarantee you'll top deck a good video.